The desert stretched endlessly, its sand glowing faintly under the light of twin moons. The air was dry, carrying with it the echo of silence, a silence so heavy that it pressed down on the soul. In the middle of this vast emptiness, a figure lay broken and weak. She was once a princess, her crown a symbol of power, her voice a command that no one dared to deny. But now, the alien princess was nothing more than a wounded exile. Her armor was shattered, her body bruised, and her spirit close to breaking. Her people, the very ones who once bowed before her, had abandoned her here to die. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound on her flesh. Her eyes, glowing faintly with the strange color of her kind, searched the horizon for any sign of life. There was nothing, only the endless dunes that shifted with the cold night wind. Every breath she took felt heavy. Every movement felt like fire burning in her veins. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked, her voice too weak to call out for help. She remembered the last words of her commander, a cruel whisper as they left her. "You are not worthy of the throne, not worthy of our people." And then they turned away, leaving her to the sand. Tears mixed with the dust on her face, but she refused to let despair fully consume her. Still, hope was fading fast. As the moons climbed higher in the sky, she thought she saw movement in the distance. Her heart raced, weak but desperate. Was it a mirage, or was it truly someone walking across the desert? She blinked, struggling to focus her fading sight. The figure came closer, step by step. It was not of her kind, not the tall and scaled warriors who had abandoned her. This was something different, something smaller but sharper. A human. He walked with steady steps, a cloak wrapped around his shoulders, dust clinging to his boots. His face carried lines of hardship, his eyes carried fire. There was no fear in him, only defiance. The princess stared, unable to understand why a human would be here, in this cursed desert. Was he a scavenger, a mercenary, or just a wanderer who had lost his way? The human stopped when he saw her lying on the sand. For a long moment, he said nothing, only studied her with a guarded gaze. Then, against all reason, he moved closer. The princess tried to speak, but her voice cracked into a broken whisper. He knelt beside her, pulling a flask from his pack. Water, clear and precious, touched her lips. At first, she resisted, pride still burning faintly inside her broken form. But thirst overpowered her, and she drank. The liquid felt like life itself, cooling the fire in her throat. When she coughed, the human supported her gently, his touch firm but not cruel. "Why?" she managed to whisper, her alien tongue shaping the human word clumsily. "Why help me?" The man's face was calm, his voice low. "No one deserves to be left like this," he said. Simple words, but they struck her deeper than any blade. He checked her wounds with quick and practiced hands. Though she winced at the pain, he worked carefully. Bandages from his pack pressed against bleeding cuts, torn cloth wrapped around her arms. The princess watched him, unable to understand. Humans were supposed to be weak, defiant perhaps, but doomed against empires. Yet here was one human who chose to save her, when even her own kind would not. As the cold wind grew sharper, the human lifted her carefully. She wanted to protest, but her body was too weak to resist. Her pride screamed inside her, yet her heart felt something else, something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The human carried her across the dunes, step by step, never slowing, never wavering. The desert was cruel, but his determination was stronger. The princess, fading into sleep, thought of the strange fire in his eyes. Defiance. It was the one thing her people had lost, and perhaps it was the one thing she needed most. The night deepened, the stars spread wide above them. A broken princess and a lone human, crossing the desert together. She had been abandoned, betrayed, left to die. But in this human's defiance, a new story had begun. The desert night was colder than ice, and the stars above seemed endless. The human carried the wounded princess across the shifting dunes, his steps steady, his breath slow but strong. She was light in his arms, yet heavy with the burden of betrayal and despair. Every now and then, she opened her glowing eyes, watching his face, wondering why he still carried her when he could have left her behind. They reached a small ridge where jagged rocks broke the endless sand. The man stopped there, lowering her gently against the stone for support. From his pack, he pulled a thin sheet of fabric and stretched it between two rocks, making a simple shelter. It was not much, but it was enough to shield them from the biting desert wind. The princess tried to speak, her voice hoarse and broken. "You are human," she whispered, her words filled with disbelief. "Yes," he answered, his tone calm and steady. "Your kind is hunted by mine," she said weakly. "Why would you save me?" The human paused, looking into the flames of a small fire he had just lit. "Because no one deserves to be abandoned," he said firmly, "not even an enemy." The warmth of the fire began to chase away the cold, and the smell of cooked rations filled the air. He handed her a piece of bread, dry but nourishing, and she accepted it reluctantly. Her pride told her to refuse, yet her body demanded food. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. There was something in his gaze she could not understand. It was not fear, not hatred, not even pity. It was something stronger, a spark of defiance that seemed unshakable. For a while, there was silence, only the crackling of the fire. The princess shifted, her wounds aching, her voice softer now. "My people left me to die," she said, her words carrying pain sharper than any blade. "They called me unworthy, too weak to rule, too weak to fight." The human did not look surprised. He only nodded slowly. "They were wrong," he said. "Strength is not in cruelty. It is in standing when the world wants you down." The princess blinked, confused by his simple but powerful words. No one from her empire would ever speak this way. Her people measured worth in blood, in conquest, in fear. But this human measured it in something different, something she could not yet name. The fire burned low, and the desert wind howled outside the small shelter. The human tightened his cloak around her shoulders, making sure she would not freeze. She stared at him, stunned by his care. "Do you not fear me?" she asked quietly. "Should I?" He replied with a faint smile, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You are a princess of an empire that enslaves my people," she said bitterly. "Maybe," he answered, "but right now, you are just someone left alone, and I do not leave people behind." The words struck her heart harder than she expected. Her chest tightened, not from pain, but from something else. She had been raised to believe humans were weak, fragile, creatures good only for labor or conquest. But here was one who carried her without hesitation, who looked her in the eyes without fear. And in his gaze, she saw strength greater than any warrior in her empire. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her towards sleep. Her last thought before drifting away was a single question she could not answer. Why would a human, of all beings, be the one to give her hope? The human sat awake long after she slept. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, his eyes scanning the desert shadows. He knew danger was close. He had seen signs of tracks in the sand. Alien hunters were not far. Still, he did not waver. He looked at the fragile figure sleeping by the fire, and he made a silent vow. If they want her dead, they will have to go through me first. The night stretched on, heavy with silence and hidden threats. 2 lives bound by fate sat in the desert, one broken and abandoned, the other defiant and unyielding. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but both had already taken the first step toward a bond neither empire nor army could break. The desert sun rose slowly, spilling golden light across the endless dunes. The alien princess stirred awake, her body still aching, but her mind sharper than before. She turned her head and found the human already awake, standing guard with his blade at his side. His eyes scanned the horizon with a focus that made him look more like a warrior than a wanderer. When he noticed her watching, He gave a small nod, then crouched by the fire. You need food, he said simply, handing her a piece of dried meat and water. She accepted it without protest this time, hunger defeating her pride. But her thoughts were heavy. Her heart was restless. The weight of her past pressed against her chest, demanding to be spoken. The human sat across from her, silent, waiting. Finally, she drew in a slow breath and spoke. My people betrayed me, she said, her voice trembling. They left me in the desert because I was no longer useful to them. Her words hung in the dry air like a blade waiting to fall. The human tilted his head, his eyes narrowing, but not in surprise. Why? He asked softly. Why abandon their own princess? Her eyes flickered with pain, glowing faintly in the morning light. Because I failed them, she admitted bitterly. I was sent to lead a campaign to conquer a human colony at the edge of our empire. Her voice broke, and she clenched her fists in the sand. I refused to slaughter the weak, the children, the helpless. She lifted her gaze to his, and for the first time he saw shame there. My commanders called it weakness. My family called it disgrace, she whispered. They said mercy is poison, and I had poisoned myself. Her body shook with fury and grief. So they stripped me of my rank, cast me out, and left me to die in the desert. The human's jaw tightened, anger flickering across his face. For a moment, he said nothing, only stared at her with eyes burning like fire. Finally, he spoke, his voice hard and steady. They call mercy weakness, but they are cowards, he said. Strength is not killing the helpless. Strength is standing against cruelty. His words struck her like a storm, shaking the wall she had built inside her heart. She looked at him with disbelief. You're kind. You were supposed to be slaves, broken and obedient, she murmured. Yet you speak like a king, stronger than anyone in my empire. The human gave a bitter smile, his eyes never leaving hers. I am no king, he said. I am just a man who refuses to bow. He leaned closer, his voice sharp as a blade. Do you understand now why your people fear us, princess? They fear humans because we do not break. The princess felt her chest tighten, her breath catching. In her people's eyes, humans were nothing, fragile and weak. Yet this one man stood taller than the armies of her empire. And for the first time, she wondered if her people were wrong, if the strength they worshipped was nothing compared to the defiance burning in this human. She lowered her gaze, her pride warring with her gratitude. You should hate me, she whispered. My people enslaved yours, hunted them, used them like tools. The human's voice was calm, but filled with steel. I do not hate you, he said. I hate what they made you believe. I hate the empire that would betray its own and call it strength. Silence followed, heavy but not empty. The princess felt something shift inside her, a fragile seed of hope taking root. For the first time since her exile, she felt less alone. This human was not just her rescuer. He was something more, a mirror showing her the truth her people never wanted her to see. The wind carried faint sounds across the desert. The human stiffened, his hand moving to his weapon. Tracks had been found, and hunters would soon arrive. The princess noticed his focus, her heart tightening with fear. They will come from me, she said, and they will kill you if you stand in their way. The human's reply was simple and unshaken. Then let them come, he said, his voice filled with defiance. They will find I am not so easy to break. The princess stared at him, and for the first time since her abandonment, she felt something stronger than despair. She felt the stirrings of belief in this strange, defiant human who chose to stand with her when her own people would not. In his fire, she saw the possibility of a different kind of strength, one that her empire could never understand. The desert no longer felt silent. The human sensed it before the princess did, the shift in the wind, the faint vibrations in the sand, the smell of something unnatural riding the air. He crouched low, his hand brushing against the grains, eyes narrowing. They are close, he muttered, his voice low but certain. The princess sat against the rocks, still weak but alert. Her eyes glowed faintly, scanning the horizon, and she saw it too. Dark shapes moving between the dunes, too quick, too coordinated to be wanderers. "They have sent hunter squads," she whispered, her voice shaking with both fear and shame. "They will not leave until I am dead." The human's jaw tightened, but there was no fear in his eyes, only fire. "Then we will not make it easy for them," he said firmly. He stood tall, scanning the rocky ridge they had chosen as shelter. It was not much, but it was enough. Rocks for cover, high ground for ambush, and sand soft enough to hide traps. Without wasting time, he pulled rope, metal shards, and small charges from his pack. His hands moved quickly, tying, planting, hiding. The princess watched in silence, surprised at his skill. "You fight like a soldier," she said softly. The man gave no answer, only a faint, bitter smile. When the first squad crested the dune, their armor shining under the morning sun, the desert trembled with their march. 6 alien hunters, tall and armored, carrying blades and rifles marked with the seal of her empire. They spread out, forming a circle, their movements precise. The princess's heart raced. "They will smell my blood," she whispered. The human only nodded, tightening his grip on his blade. "Let them come," he said calmly. The hunters moved closer, weapons raised. One of them shouted in their alien tongue, his voice sharp, "Princess, surrender yourself and die with honor." Her chest ached at the cruel mockery, her eyes burning with tears. Before she could answer, the human stepped forward, his stance defiant. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice steady as stone. The hunters laughed, a harsh sound echoing across the dunes. "A human dares stand in our path." One sneered, raising his rifle. But before the shot could be fired, the ground beneath him exploded. The trap the human had set with charges blasted sand and rock upward, throwing 2 hunters to the ground. Their armor cracked. The princess gasped, shocked by the sudden defiance. The human didn't hesitate. He moved like a storm, blade flashing as he cut into the nearest hunter. Steel clashed against alien metal, sparks flying as the fight erupted. The princess, weak as she was, dragged herself behind cover, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream for him to run, to escape, but the words froze in her throat. Because he wasn't running, he was standing, one man against an empire. The hunters regrouped, 3 of them circling, rifles spitting fire. The human dived behind the rocks, returning with quick strikes, his traps detonating one after another. Each blast shook the ridge, filling the air with dust and fire. The aliens roared, their voices filled with rage. But the human fought on, unbroken, his eyes blazing with defiance. The princess pressed her hand against her chest, trembling as she watched. She had been raised to believe humans were fragile, weak, prey for the strong. But here was one who fought like no warrior she had ever seen. Every strike, every step was filled with purpose, with defiance against impossible odds. One hunter broke through, rushing toward her, blade raised. Fear surged in her veins, but before the strike could land, the human slammed into him, knocking him aside. The 2 crashed into the sand, rolling blades clashing. The human's cloak tore, his arm bleeding, but he did not falter. With a roar, he drove his blade through the hunter's chest, the alien collapsing with a metallic cry. The others hesitated for the first time, their confidence shaken. They had expected an easy kill, a simple execution of a broken princess. But this human, this single human, had turned the desert into a battlefield. The dust settled, the last 2 hunters retreating into the dunes. Their voices carried on the wind, promising they would return with more. The human stood panting, his blade dripping with alien blood, his face streaked with sweat and sand. He looked at the princess, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "This is only the beginning," he said. "They will keep coming, but so will I." The princess's chest tightened, her eyes wide. For the first time since her betrayal, she felt not fear, but awe. In this man's defiance, she saw something greater than armies, greater than thrones. She saw hope. The desert night was alive with silence. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of hunters waiting in the dark. The human sat by the small fire, sharpening his blade slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The alien princess lay close to the warmth, her body wrapped in his cloak, but her mind restless. She could feel it, just as he did. The Empire would not accept failure. The squad that had retreated would return, not alone this time, but with reinforcements. "They will come soon," she whispered, her voice trembling. The human nodded without looking at her. "Then we will be ready," he said calmly. The princess frowned, her eyes shining faintly in the firelight. "You cannot fight them all," she said softly. "You are only one man." The human's hand stilled on the blade, his jaw tight. "One man is enough when he refuses to kneel," he answered. His words carried into the night like a challenge. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across the rocks. The princess pulled herself upright, despite her pain. "I cannot fight like I once did," she admitted, "but I know their tactics, their weaknesses." Her voice gained strength as she spoke. "If you will fight for me, then I will guide you." The human finally turned to her, and for the first time she saw respect in his eyes, not pity. "Then we fight together," he said. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of footsteps. Not one, not two, but many. The hunters were coming, their movements sharp and precise. The human quickly doused the fire, plunging them into darkness. Only the stars and the glow of the princess's eyes lit the night. Shadows moved between the dunes, tall figures in armor, rifles gleaming under the moons. A dozen hunters spread across the ridge, their voices harsh and commanding. The princess whispered urgently, "They will circle, push you into the open, then strike from all sides." The human's lips curved in a faint smile. "Then let's not give them what they want," he said. The first explosion ripped through the night. One of his hidden charges buried under the sand ignited, throwing 2 hunters into the air. Before the others could react, arrows of fire shot across the ridge as the human hurled burning oil flasks. The darkness lit up, flames dancing wildly, shadows twisting into chaos. The hunters roared, firing their rifles into the night. Bolts of searing light tore through the rocks, shattering stone, shaking the ground. The human moved swiftly, striking from the shadows, blade flashing. Every strike was precise, every movement filled with defiance. He fought not like prey, but like a predator who refused to die. The princess pressed herself against the rocks, her heart racing. She could see every trap he had laid now, clever lines of rope, hidden shards, burning oils. Each one turned the desert into a weapon in his hands. She whispered warnings, calling out when a hunter flanked, shouting when their formation shifted. Her voice and his blade worked as one. Still, the battle was brutal. A hunter lunged at the human, knocking him to the sand, claws tearing into his arm. Pain flashed across his face, but he roared back, driving his blade deep into the alien's chest. Blood sprayed the sand, dark under the firelight. Another hunter swung a heavy rifle like a club, slamming it across his shoulder. The human staggered, but did not fall. His eyes burned with the same fire that had carried him through every step. The princess's voice shook as she cried out. "Behind you!" The human spun, barely in time, his blade catching the strike aimed for his neck. Sparks flew, steel against alien alloy. With a fierce shove, he forced the hunter back, then slashed, ending the fight in a spray of sparks. The firelight painted the desert red and gold. Bodies of hunters lay scattered across the dunes, their armor broken, their pride shattered. The survivors began to retreat, their voices filled with anger and disbelief. "This is not over," one shouted before vanishing into the dark. The human stood in the middle of the burning ridge, his chest heaving, his blade dripping with alien blood. The flames flickered in his eyes, making him look more like a warrior of legend than a man. The princess stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. She had thought him doomed, fragile, foolish for standing against an empire. But now she knew the truth. He was not fragile. He was fire, unyielding and unstoppable. Slowly, he turned to her, his face weary but unbroken. "They will come again," he said, his voice steady. "And when they do, we will stand again." The princess felt her chest tighten, but this time not with despair. It was something else, something she had lost long ago. It was hope, born from the fire of a human's defiance. The night after the battle was heavy with silence. The flames had died down, leaving only blackened sand and broken armor scattered across the dunes. The princess sat close to the rocks, her body weak, but her mind racing. Her glowing eyes kept drifting to the human, who cleaned his blade slowly, his expression unreadable. For hours he had fought, one man against many, and still he stood. His body was marked with wounds, his cloak torn, but his spirit seemed untouched. The princess felt a strange ache in her chest, something she had not felt since before her exile. Respect. The human finally broke the silence, his voice steady. "They will return," he said. "More of them, stronger ones." The princess lowered her gaze, her voice heavy with guilt. "They are not after you," she whispered. "They are after me. If you leave me here, you may survive." For a moment, the desert felt frozen, as if holding its breath. The human lifted his head, his eyes burning in the dim starlight. "Leave you?" he repeated, his tone sharp. "I do not abandon those who stand beside me." The princess's chest tightened, her lips parting in disbelief. "You would risk death for me?" she asked softly. He gave a faint smile, though his eyes remained hard. "It is not about risk," he said. "It is about honor." The word struck her like a blade. Honor. In her empire, honor was spoken often but rarely lived. It meant obedience to power, loyalty to cruelty. But here, in this human's mouth, it meant something different, something purer. It meant refusing to turn away, refusing to bow to fear. The princess whispered, her voice trembling. "My people call me weak for sparing lives. They call me a disgrace, a failure." The human leaned closer, his voice firm and unyielding. "Mercy is not weakness," he said. "It is strength, the kind your empire will never understand." Her eyes widened, tears glimmering at the edges. For the first time since her abandonment, she felt seen, understood. This human did not see her as a failure. He saw her as someone worth saving, worth standing beside. The night grew colder, the wind howling across the dunes. The human rose and began moving rocks, setting new traps, his movements steady despite his wounds. The princess forced herself to sit taller, her pride returning in a new form. "I cannot fight with a blade," she admitted, "but I can guide you. I know their formations, their weapons." The human glanced at her, and for the first time, his lips curved into a true smile. "Then we are partners," he said. The word echoed in her heart, stronger than any vow of loyalty she had known before. Partners, not master and servant, not ruler and soldier, but equals. Something her empire would never allow, yet something she had long desired. The fire was gone, but warmth spread between them in silence. The princess watched him work, his defiance unbroken, his spirit unshaken. She whispered into the night, though she was not sure if he heard. "In you, I see the strength my people lost." The human paused, looking at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the stars. "In you," he said softly, "I see the courage to stand against them, even when it cost you everything." The desert stretched endlessly around them, filled with danger, filled with hunters waiting to strike again. But in that moment, beneath the cold stars, neither of them felt alone. The bond between them had grown stronger than fear, stronger than betrayal. It was a bond forged not by power, but by choice, by honor. The princess leaned back against the rock, exhaustion pulling her down, but her heart lighter than before. The human sat close, his blade across his knees, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He knew the enemy would return, and he would face them, not because he had to, but because he had chosen to. And in that choice, the alien princess found something her people had taken from her. She found hope again. Hope in a human's honor. Hope in his defiance. And in that hope, she began to believe not only in him, but in herself once more. The desert dawn was painted in blood-red light. The air was heavy, and even the wind seemed to whisper of war. The human stood at the ridge with his blade in hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The alien princess sat beside him, her strength returning little by little, her gaze sharp and steady. They both knew the empire would not stop. The hunters who had retreated would return with more, and this time they would come in force. The princess whispered quietly, her voice filled with both fear and pride. They will send an entire strike force. The human nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. Then we end here, he said calmly. The ground trembled as the hunters appeared. Dozens of armored soldiers crested the dunes, their banners flying, their weapons glowing with deadly light. The sight made the princess's heart race, but she forced herself not to look away. The human, however, did not flinch. One man against an army, yet his stance was steady. He turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. "Stand with me." Her breath caught, then she nodded. "Always," she whispered. The battle began with fire. The hunters unleashed volleys of plasma that lit up the desert sky. But the human had prepared. Every rock, every trap, every line of rope turned the ridge into a fortress. Explosions tore through their ranks, sandstorms of dust and flame rising into the air. The human moved like lightning, striking from the shadows, his blade flashing, his traps detonating one after another. The princess guided him, her voice sharp and commanding, warning him of flanks, pointing out weak spots in their formation. Her knowledge and his defiance became one. Together they fought, partners bound not by duty but by choice. The hunters roared, pressing harder, their numbers overwhelming. One by one they closed in, surrounding him. The human's cloak was torn, his body bleeding, but his eyes still burned with fire. The princess felt her heart break at the sight. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring her pain, and grabbed a fallen alien rifle. Though her hands trembled, she aimed and fired, bolts of energy striking down the enemies who dared get too close. For the first time, she fought not as a princess of an empire, but as a warrior beside a human. And it gave her strength. The final clash came as the commander of the hunters stepped forward, towering in heavy armor, his voice filled with scorn. "You are nothing," he spat. "A broken princess and a fragile human." The human raised his blade, his voice steady. "Then it will be the broken and the fragile who end you." The fight was brutal, the commander striking with crushing blows. The human staggered, but never fell. Each strike answered with steel and fire. The princess fired again and again, covering his back, her defiance as strong as his. Finally, with a roar, the human drove his blade through the commander's chest, shattering armor and pride alike. The desert fell silent, the surviving hunters retreating into the dunes, their will broken, their army defeated. The princess collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving, her glowing eyes filled with tears. The human stood over her, exhausted but unbroken, his blade still firm in his hand. Slowly, he reached out, lifting her back to her feet. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "They abandoned me. They call me weak, but you..." Her words broke, her tears falling. "You gave me hope again." The human's eyes softened, his voice low, "And you gave me something worth fighting for." The desert wind carried their words away, but their bond remained unshakable. The princess, once abandoned and broken, now stood with new strength. The human, once alone, now carried more than defiance. He carried destiny. Together, they walked into the rising sun. No longer exile and wanderer, no longer enemy and stranger, but partners bound by honor, forged in fire, and guided by hope. And in that moment, the desert no longer felt like a place of death. It felt like the beginning of something greater, the beginning of a story that neither empire nor army could ever erase.